There are those who recognized the onset of UFO activity in Los Angeles around the same time as this person was living and working in the area, and believe that he was the cause of the sudden increase in activity. It can't be denied that the Battle of Los Angeles, beginning within the early hours of February 25th of 1942, falls within that time frame. We'll leave that event for another episode. In the meantime, enjoy the show. Have you ever wondered about the origin of aliens, ghosts, or demons? Have you ever asked your priest or pastor if the Bible can explain these things, only to come away with no real answers? I don't know about you, but I have. So I've spent the past 15 years researching these topics using history, science, and Hebrew texts as my sources, and I've pieced together a very compelling explanation for many of the world's mysteries. I'd like to start a conversation about the things your pastor is afraid to talk about. This is Audra Moore, and you're listening to Evil's Ancient Origins. This episode is centered on an eccentric genius named Jack Parsons. In the 1930s, Parsons helped found what would later become NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. A brilliant rocket engineer by day and an occultist by night, Parsons straddled the line between science and the supernatural. But where did it all begin? Well, Jack Parsons was born on October 2nd of 1914 to Marvel and Ruth Parsons. Jack's mother, Ruth, came from a wealthy manufacturing family in Massachusetts, but his parents had just moved to Los Angeles about a year before his birth. Being a young mother living so far from her home must have been very difficult for her. Now, Marvel Parsons, on the other hand, Jack's father, was an automobile accessories salesman and, as it turned out, wasn't ready to be a father. By March of 1915, only 5 months following the birth of her baby, Ruth divorced Marvel after finding that he had been soliciting a prostitute. Ruth cut all ties with Marvel, intending that he would have no further communication with Jack, and Marvel ended up returning to Massachusetts to escape the reputation of being an adulterer. Soon after the divorce, Ruth's parents moved to California to support their daughter in raising Jack. They bought a home in an affluent neighborhood of Pasadena known as Millionaire's Row, where Jack was sure to get the best education. No matter what their intentions, Jack did rather poorly in school. It's speculated that he may have been struggling with dyslexia, but the family turmoil was more likely the reason. Nonetheless, he was an avid reader of mythology, science fiction, and fantasy novels centering around space travel. Jack was obviously looking to escape the trauma of his childhood. In high school, Jack was often bullied until an upperclassman, Edward Foreman, came to the rescue. Edward and Jack shared an interest in science fiction and quickly bonded. According to Wikipedia, Foreman and Parsons started building model rockets in their backyards and adopted as their motto the Latin phrase ad astra per aspera, which means through rough ways to the stars. Interestingly enough, that is also the motto of the state of Kansas. I find that strange. Anyway, Foreman later stated that it was our desire and intent to develop the ability to rocket to the moon. Their aspirations were quite lofty, considering that the Wright brothers had only achieved flight in 1903, some 25 or so years earlier. Their dream of flying to the moon had been cultivated by the volumes of fantasy paperbacks that they consumed, by the likes of Edgar Rice Burroughs and Jules Verne. As Jack's grades continued to slip, his mother decided to send him away to a private all-boys military boarding school in San Diego, where he was soon expelled for blowing up the toilets. In mid-1929, the Parsons family toured Europe before returning to a city which was now gripped by the Great Depression. Upon its return, Jack reconnected with his friend Edward Foreman and found part-time work in an explosives manufacturing plant, where he began to teach himself the basics of chemistry. While Foreman found work as an airplane mechanic, sheet metal worker, and apprentice machinist in aircraft and ammunition factories. These skills proved to be hugely valuable in furthering their passion for designing rockets, which they continued to do on their spare time. As their experiments grew in scale, the pair had to eventually relocate their experimental rocket tests to a nearby dry canyon at the foot of the San Gabriel mountain range due to the explosives leaving their backyards in shambles. As their experiments grew more complex, the pair decided to reach out to rocketry experts, both American and those abroad. By 1935, an article in the Los Angeles Times caught their attention. It covered a paper written by a Caltech student named William Boulay about the works of an Austrian engineer, Eugene Sanger. They decided to contact the author of the article, who then directed them to a fellow student who shared their enthusiasm of rocket propulsion. Frank Molina was a grad student studying to gain a PhD in mathematics and mechanical engineering. The three decided to join efforts and create a proposal for Caltech, hoping to access their laboratory and machinery. Instead, gaining favor with one of Caltech's unorthodox professors, Theodore von Karman, professor of aeronautics, who also happened to be the director of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory. The young men were granted access to the Guggenheim Laboratory during off hours. So the team of burgeoning engineers soon began scrounging junkyards for parts to build their rockets with. Von Karman later wrote, "I was immediately captivated by the earnestness and enthusiasm of those young men. Most young people are quite serious about their dreams, so that in itself was not what interested me. It was the unusually strong background of the young Rocketeers." Soon after, another Caltech student became a member of the team, Apollo A.M.O. Smith, who later became integral to the team for his pioneering work in computational fluid dynamics. And from there, Parsons and his colleagues, nicknamed the Suicide Squad due to their dangerous experiments, laid the groundwork for modern rocketry. In 1936, the group founded Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a term chosen to avoid the negative stigma attached to rocketry at the time. And by November of that year, the team achieved successful ignition. Their work was crucial in advancing both liquid fuel and solid fuel rockets, setting the stage for the space race to come. Wikipedia states, sharing socialist views, they operated on an egalitarian basis. Molina taught the others about scientific procedure, and they taught him about the practical elements of rocketry. It wasn't all work, though. It goes on to say that the young men often socialized, smoking marijuana and drinking, while Molina and Parsons set about writing a semi-autobiographical science fiction screenplay they planned to pitch to Hollywood with strong anti-capitalist and pacifist themes. The irony here is that Their research and advancements were eventually funded by the military through their involvement in the university's Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory Rockets Research Group. The American military ultimately utilized their technological advancements in dominating the military world's stage. Parsons believed that technology and magic were two sides of the same cosmic coin. Early on in Jack's youth, he began investigating the occult, and it is said that he performed a ritual to invoke the devil into his bedroom. Afraid that the ritual was successful, Jack immediately ceased performing these types of rituals, but his curiosity never completely subsided. In 1934, Parsons met Helen Northrup at a local church dance, whom he married in April of 1935. By 1938, the Suicide Squad had to relocate their experiments once again from the Guggenheim labs back to their familiar Arroyo Seco Canyon. Before every rocket test, Parsons was known to recite British occultist Aleister Crowley's poem titled Hymn to Pan. The poem seems to be another incantation of the devil, calling him to come and inhabit their own body and manifest the power of Pan, making them as like a god themselves. Now, you have to understand, space travel and rocketry were considered to be just as taboo as Crowley's occultism at that time. So, it was considered stuff that was only dreamed about by the outcasts of society. In 1939, Parsons and his wife attended a Church of Thelema's Gnostic Mass in Hollywood. Now, Thelema is a Western esoteric and occult, social and spiritual philosophy and religion founded by Aleister Crowley in the early 1900s. In case you're unfamiliar with Mr. Crowley, he was an Englishman who was also born to a wealthy family. He identified himself as the Beast 666 and a prophet who was entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus. He was first called the Beast by his frustrated mother, a title he took pride in. According to Wikipedia, this Aeon of Horus, which is considered to be the era we are currently in, was marked by a significant shift in spiritual and societal paradigms, emphasizing self-realization, individualism, and the pursuit of one's true will. Hence Crowley's saying, which is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Wikipedia goes on to say that Crowley was educated at Trinity College at the University of Cambridge. He focused his attention on mountaineering and poetry, resulting in several publications, including a book of erotic poetry. Some biographers allege that he was recruited in college into a British intelligence agency, further suggesting that he remained a spy throughout his life. In 1889, Crowley joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was trained in ceremonial magic, and later went on to develop his own rituals and then eventually a whole religion of his own, known as Thelema. I find it very interesting that someone who was recruited by a British intelligence agency would then go on to learn about ceremonial magic. Parsons, enticed by Crowley's writings, was intrigued by the Gnostic Mass he had attended and continued to attend the church sporadically for the next year. During this time, he would study more of Crowley's work and encouraged his wife to do the same. He soon began to believe that the Thelemic magic was a force that could be explained by a burgeoning science known as quantum physics. Soon, as a devoted disciple of Aleister Crowley's mystical philosophy, he became a key member of the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, an esoteric magical order created by Karl Kellner, a fellow chemist, inventor, and industrialist from Austria, that explored the boundaries between human potential and supernatural intervention. In 1941, Jack's wife Helen went away on a trip. While she was gone, Jack began a sexual relationship with her 17-year-old sister, Sarah, whom, Parsons stated, he had found more sexually attractive than his wife. The OTO encouraged such open exploration, and Sarah was a willing participant. According to Wikipedia, upon Helen's return, Sarah asserted that she was Parsons' new wife. Conflicted by the goings-on, Helen began a relationship with fellow occultist Wilfred Talbot Smith, and the four remained friends. In 1942, Parsons took over as head of the OTO post, which was now known as the Agape Lodge, after Parsons had purchased an American craftsman-style mansion in the same Millionaire's Row of Pasadena where he had grown up, and he used it as a home base for the OTO. Many of the members lived there and participated in ongoing rituals. So the lodge soon began to draw scrutiny from local law enforcement over allegations of a black magic cult, which it was. Crowley and Parsons maintained extensive correspondence throughout the years. Crowley saw Parsons as a promising magical adept, often providing guidance through his letters. In one notable communication, Crowley referred to Parsons as his star pupil and was impressed by his magical dedication and scientific background. In 1943, Jack's team had projects in full swing, gaining traction with military contracts and making significant advancements within the field of aeronautics. Jack procured a contract with the U.S. Navy to redesign their solid fuel, which had been causing a toxic smoke that plagued their current design. This led to the invention of Aeroplex, a technology for smokeless vapor trails. But things never went as smoothly as they hoped. Explosions were not a rare occurrence, and with each incident, costs rose. Over time, Parsons began to lose favor with his business colleagues. He would often show up to work hungover and sleep deprived because of the late-night rituals performed at the lodge. So, in December of 1944, Aerojet, who officially changed their name to Jet Propulsion Laboratory, decided to sell controlling shares of their stock to the General Tire and Rubber Company. That was in order to keep up with increased demand for their rockets due to ongoing war efforts. Parsons' buddies from Caltech would only agree to the sale on the condition that Parsons and Foreman would be let go, pointing to their occult activities as unprofessional behavior. Moving forward, Jack's most controversial work centered around what he called Babylon Working, a complex magical ritual designed to evoke a supernatural entity and potentially open interdimensional portals. But Parsons wasn't alone in believing that UFO encounters were more than just physical phenomenon. In 1945, Parsons met L. Ron Hubbard, who would later found Scientology, and they quickly became close collaborators in both magical and personal endeavors. But their relationship was even more complex and controversial. Parsons and Hubbard conducted elaborate sex magic rituals together. Their goal wasn't just scientific exploration, but a profound attempt to communicate with what they believed were extraterrestrial and/or transdimensional intelligences. Parsons believed that the Babylon working ritual would create a moonchild, a magical being that would usher in a new spiritual age. And both men believed in the potential of human consciousness to manipulate reality beyond conventional scientific understanding. Aleister Crowley was critical of some of Parsons' more extreme magical experiments, warning him about the dangers of uncontrolled magical practice. In one letter, Crowley cautioned Parsons about becoming too emotionally invested in his magical workings. The collaboration between Parsons and Hubbard was intense, but short-lived. Hubbard became romantically involved with Parsons' girlfriend, Betty Page, whom Parsons believed to be the incarnation of his moonchild. This created significant tension between them. Moreover, Hubbard eventually convinced Parsons to invest money in a dubious business venture, which involved purchasing yachts to resell. By 1946, their relationship had completely fractured. Hubbard ran off with Page and the remaining money, leading Parsons to curse him with another magical ritual. Their failed venture ultimately left Parsons financially devastated. Ironically, Hubbard's invented religion, Scientology, incorporated much of the mystical thinking Parsons had explored. It's worth noting that despite the seemingly far-fetched nature of their beliefs, both Parsons and Hubbard were serious scientific thinkers. Parsons making significant contribution to rocket science, while Hubbard having a background in engineering and writing. They each demonstrate a fascinating intersection of mysticism, science, and personal ambition, a world where engineering and magical rituals could coexist in the mind of an extraordinary individual. Tragically, Parsons died in 1952 in a mysterious laboratory explosion. Some of his colleagues whispered that his magical experiments had finally crossed a line, but his legacy persists. Modern UFO research continues to acknowledge that these phenomena might be more complex than simple extraterrestrial visitation. They could represent interactions between consciousness, dimensionality, and intelligences that we're only beginning to understand. From a Christian perspective, the story of Jack Parsons reveals the dangerous spiritual deception that occurs when individuals seek supernatural power outside of God's divine protection and guidance. The Bible warns explicitly against occult practices in multiple passages. Deuteronomy 18:10-12 clearly states, "Let no one be found among you who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord." Parsons' involvement with Aleister Crowley's Thelema and elaborate magical rituals represents a spiritual rebellion against God's boundaries. These practices aren't just misguided intellectual pursuits, but are direct attempts to access supernatural power through demonic channels. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12 that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly realms. By attempting to incarnate a magical entity through sexual acts, Parsons and his members were opening themselves up to demonic possession. Such rituals are not harmless experiments, but direct invitations for malevolent spiritual forces who seek to separate humanity from God's love and protection. L. Ron Hubbard's subsequent creation of Scientology further demonstrates how these occult explorations can lead individuals into elaborate systems of spiritual deception. Both Parsons and Hubbard created belief systems that promised transcendence and hidden knowledge, but ultimately only offered a counterfeit spirituality that fails to promote a true relationship with God. The tragic arc of Parsons' life, a brilliant scientist whose pursuit of supernatural knowledge led to personal destruction, serves as a powerful cautionary tale. His rocket science achievements are overshadowed by his spiritual wandering, which ultimately led to a fatal laboratory explosion that many saw as the culmination of his dangerous magical experiments. From a Christian worldview, true spiritual power and understanding come not through ritualistic magic or occult practices, but through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The gospel offers genuine transformation, not through manipulative rituals, but through God's grace, redemption, and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Parsons' story is a stark reminder of Jesus' words in John 14:6. I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Any attempt to find spiritual truth or supernatural power outside of Jesus is ultimately a path of delusion and, potentially, destruction. This is Audra Moore, and you're listening to Evil's Ancient Origins. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and will join us again next time when we start another conversation about the things your pastor is afraid to talk about. Look for us next week on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever your favorite podcasts are found.